Welcome to the DroidDevCast, a podcast brought to you by the team at Esper, bringing you the latest news, thoughtful discussion, and insights into all things Android DevOps, and open source software development. I'm your host, Rin Oliver, Content Marketing Manager at Esper, and today I'm joined by Soren Hamby, whose most recent position was at InVision as a Design, Advocate, and Community Relations Manager. They are also a maintainer on the Accessibility Project. Soren, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited to get a chance to chat with you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
And we're here this week to learn a bit more about the principles of accessible user experience design and explore best practices for designing applications and websites for accessibility. To wrap up the show, we'll dive into Soren's work in accessible design and their experience working in the industry over the years, and also get some of their tips for software developers that are hoping to make their applications and websites more accessible. So with that said, let's get started. Soren, what are some of the core tenets of accessible user experience design? How do you strive to bring those into your own work?
Well, I would say that one of the core tenets would be just that it's universal. A lot of people think of accessibility as being specifically for people that have physical disabilities and use assistive tech, but I've been trying to work on expanding my ideas of accessibility to include people that have maybe not a disability, but have other access needs, as far as maybe they speak English as a second language, or class access as far as financials. Also, just the ability to access things through the internet, like if you have broadband service or not, if you have access to consistent cellular service. So things like that all contribute to our ability to access things. And I'm trying to think of things in a decentralized way.
And what do you wish more tech companies got right when it comes to accessible UI and UX design? For those that aren't aware, UI stands for user interface.
I mean, most people, they have like the big four tenets of accessibility, that it's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And I think that a lot of these things that we think of as other access concerns could fall under one of those. Like easily understandable by someone that doesn't speak English as a first language would be one of those tenets. Robust would be easily accessible by people that don't have the internet access that maybe I'm used to enjoying. So I think that we could easily apply those tenets in a variety of really flexible ways to cover these other access concerns that we're starting to consider. But this school year has definitely been a huge thing for a lot of people that are bachelor students, master's students, and even high school students. With being in a relationship with a high school teacher, I've seen that, it's not something that you can take for granted that kids will have access to internet at home and will be able to log on and do remote work. And you have to have plans for those types of things. So thinking about the way that things function inside of the systems that they're oriented in, the ecosystems that they exist inside of, all that context goes into designing something, whether it's a product or it's solving a problem. It's all part of this design aspect, and it's all part of accessibility.
What are some best practices that you would like to impress upon your fellow UI and UX designers hoping to embrace accessibility principles in their own workplace and their own designs?
Well, one of the big things is the basics. I saw an audit recently which said that less than half of e-commerce sites had just basic screen reader access, had contrast best practices. So doing things like using more than one indicator for outlines, just some of these like really basic things. That's kind of the 101s, making sure that there's alt image text. There's just some really basic things that you learn if you go through just a 101 level kind of course on accessibility. And there's just maybe like 4 categories where e-commerce sites are one of the biggest tools for people that have disabilities, and they weren't meeting these really basic core necessities, like having captions on their videos. I mean, how are people supposed to know what you're saying to them if they don't have full hearing capabilities, or they're even in like situationally disabled, like they're in a crowded place and they don't have headphones? So it doesn't make good business sense, because people with disability or that are in these like situations where they have different access needs. They want to spend their money. And so if you have ever been to a website and you haven't found what you're looking for in about like 15 seconds, you usually just like back out and go to your favorite search engine. You type in your search and you look again. You go somewhere else. So if you don't find what you're looking for, you're essentially lost. It's kind of that billboard principle of if I don't recognize what I see, if it's not easily recognizable, that you just don't get the concept. So that's why a lot of billboards are like really, really simple, because they want people to get the concept immediately and make the connection. But if you don't make that connection, if you don't find what you're looking for, then you back out and you go somewhere else. And that's what people in the disability community are doing. They're like, well, I'm not finding an accessible website, so I'm going to go somewhere else. One of the most important things is to involve the communities that you're trying to serve at every level of design. So if you think of it like how people used to view UX, developers used to be like, okay, come in and kind of like prettify things at the end, like make sure we're not going off down the wrong path. And there would be so much technical debt at that point. You'd be like, I can't really fix this. Like maybe I can make a couple of adjustments, but to radically change a design would just be so much backtracking that it was just kind of like, well, let me see if I can kind of fix this a little bit, but there's not a lot you can do at that point. With accessibility, it's very much the same thing. And I think we've seen that recently with Twitter releasing this like sound clip option where they had like an animation and you could record up to 10 minutes as a sound clip. But there was no accessible features with that, like no captions. They're like, oh, you can put in some alt text in your tweet. And everybody was just kind of like, if you let me record 10 minutes, sorry, friend, that's not going to work. It's a big problem that, of course, most of us that were in this space of accessibility saw immediately. And somebody being in that room from our community could have immediately pointed this issue out, because it's such a basic issue. It's so integral to that design, and it really needed to be thought out. Now, to Twitter's design team's credit, they have completely taken all of this credit in stride, and they have done really constructive things with it. They've built out engineers and they're building out a design team. So I feel like they've really taken that in stride and they're really trying to do better, which I haven't seen from a lot of companies. So I'm actually kind of impressed. And I really contribute that to a lot of the good leadership that's over there right now on their design systems team. It really makes all the difference. But I would say that just knowing some of these basic things and understanding that we have to be in the room, that testing is imperative, but it's just not enough, that you have to have people involved. And I think part of that is just getting more designers that are underrepresented on your teams. A lot of people don't have a designer with a disability on their teams. And it's very apparent when I am talking to someone and they're like, oh, well, a designer with sight loss wouldn't be using Sketch. Like there's no designers like that would sometimes be using VoiceOver and sometimes be using Zoom and sometimes not. And I'm like, oh, hi, that's me. And it's just like, how do we quantify the level of disability that someone has when vision falls on a spectrum?
What does accessibility mean to you in your own words?
I would just say that accessibility is basically enablement. That's the long and short of it.
So can you tell us a little bit about your career journey? What would you like to be doing in the future, and what have you done in the past? And how has all that gotten you to where you are right now?
Yeah, I've had a really interesting career journey. I like to say that I was bitten by a radioactive GeoCities website because it sounds kind of Spider-Man-y. So yeah, it was really fun to be on the internet then. There was a lot of community sharing around how to build the internet and how to make art. And I got myself one of those really cool Pablo Picasso graphics tablets and started making some really cool drawings of my Elendor elf characters from this Lord of the Rings mush that I was playing, which is a multi-user shared hallucination. It's a text-based RPG that you played on Telnet. So you log on and it's got the green text and everything. It was such a fun time to be alive. I really learned a lot from being on the web as a young person. And I started working at my school doing InDesign layouts because I had been using Adobe since oh gosh, I can't even remember when I didn't have Adobe in the house because my mom was a graphic designer and turned publisher, and my dad was a computer engineer. So I kind of had the perfect storm of my parents had the right stuff in the house to set me up for being a very young computer graphics person. So I got started really young, and I actually graduated early and went to college and didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a lot of issues with concentration because I had undiagnosed ADHD. And we didn't have iPhones then. So other people would be like, oh, I'm going to sit down and work for 15 minutes over lunch. And I'd be like, the cafeteria is closed. What happened? I've worked all the way through class. So I would get these hyper focus moments. And I just had a really hard time with feeling like I was not very effortful with doing things that came really naturally to other people. I did eventually go back and get my Bachelor of Fine Arts in design. And that was when I was older and I had an iPhone, and I also went back and got a diagnosis and support, and it made all the difference for me. I graduated with honors that time instead of struggling to get by, and I felt like it was a much better experience for me going back as an older person. And I was able to do a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have been able to do, like work for clients and also go to school at the same time. So I built up this freelance practice, and I decided I wanted to have a full-time job in design rather than just picking up all these clients. And one of these people were like, I'd love to hire you, but you don't have a bachelor's degree. And I worked in this military town where everything was government contracts. So I needed to have a bachelor's degree. So that was kind of my first run-in with, I guess, elitism in the design field. Was that it was obvious that I could do the work, but it was just also a requirement that I had a bachelor's degree. And it gave me a lot of focus. And I also did get to learn a lot about user experience. I got to do an independent study, and I did 2 internships, and we started a local chapter, a student chapter of the UXPA, which was super great. But I think that it also gave me the perspective of there's just not enough support for students, and there's not enough knowledge behind, how to support students and give them the tools that they need to be successful. And also to have entry into this world of technology, because almost everything that we do requires that you have a bachelor's degree, or if you don't have a bachelor's degree, you have to have social capital and you have to know people to get ahead. So that's unfortunate. So I guess the next thing that happened to me was that, and actually this happened 4 years ago, is that I decided I was going to move to New York. I decided I wasn't going to put my life on hold any longer. And I started making plans to just pick up my life and move without knowing anyone at all. I knew one person. I guess that's something. So I was like, okay, well, I know one person, and I made plans with them to spend some time in New York over New Year's Eve. And it just kind of all fell apart, and I ended up meeting my partner, and it was a really humbling experience, and being flexible. And I think I used the word pivot 5 times on that trip, because it was everything went wrong with the flights and booking reservations and everything. And it was the most flexible I think I've ever had to be. And it was very uncomfortable for me at first, but it's really dictated a lot of how I've learned to live my life, cooking without recipes, and just being a lot more comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity, and just saying okay, how can we move on from this? It's not anybody's fault. I could be mad at people, but I'm just going to be cool. I'm just going to not be upset with gate agents or people that told me my connecting flight is not here or anything like that. And it was a really defining trip because I was like, okay, I can do New York. I'm from Alabama, and this is my first time in this large of a city, and I rode the subway, and I, made it several days in the city, and then I went outside the city, and then I came back on New Jersey Transit. Like I could do this. I could commute. And then I moved up here and started working as a contractor. And I've worked for a couple of bigger Fortune 500 companies. I somehow got into fintech, which is a weird specialty to get into accidentally. It actually presents a lot of really cool accessibility challenges, though, because financial tech is very, very regulated. It has a lot of old technology that they're still running off of, and it's considered to be a public service. So, you can't get by without having a bank account now. You can't get by without having online access to things. And how do you have the same access for a lot of people with different needs and modes of access and devices that they use? So it's a really interesting challenge to think about data presentation. There's a lot of really cool stuff there. But I just recently worked for InVision, which unfortunately we've also been kind of hit hard by the economy and had some restructuring, some changes in strategy. So they had to let a lot of people go recently. But it was a really interesting experience. And I took this job there as a community relations person. The title is design advocate. And I basically was building a product without an interface, it felt like, because I was building a community for individual contributor designers. So doing research and discovery, talking to people about where they were right now and what they needed. And it's very fun because there wasn't selling involved with it. It's like a lot of people are like, okay, we're going to do this marketing thing and you're going to try to push products and stuff. But it was very relationship based, and I wasn't under the pressure to be like, okay, well, now if you sign up for our pack for $9.99, you can get this free knife block. But it just felt very comfortable, and I was there to be a resource and not to do anything that I wasn't already doing. It was just something I naturally fell into, and I felt like my whole background of coming from this community-based learning, from going through college and supplementing my education with different kinds of community learning, and then some of the other extracurriculars, I would say, that weren't my 9 to 5, but that I've done over my career. I feel like those have all led up to this one position where I got to dive really deeply into community. And design relations is really, really new, and there's not a lot of people doing it. I would say Figma has a team. There's a couple of other software as a service companies that have a design relations or design advocate kind of position. And everyone is a little bit insular. There's not a group where we're all together sharing our secrets and our metrics and what our success and failures are. But there is this great community of developer relations, people that have been doing this a lot longer. I would say more like 10 to 15 years. Microsoft is the leader in this space. They are so incredibly open and knowledgeable. And so I found this community, and the person that literally wrote the top book on Amazon invited me to this community, and I just talked to them on Twitter, and they were just so nice. And it's amazing what a social community can do. and accomplish. And so I've taken all this, like learning, and went to DevRel Earth and a conference, which was online this year, and just applied it to what can we do that's like this, but for designers. Like, how can I transfer these metrics to, you're looking at GitHub. How can I look at usage as a person that's at a design SaaS? So it's very different, and it's definitely something that was a little bit of a departure from a lot of the product design that I've done before, but I feel like it takes that same sort of critical thinking and problem solving, and very much being in everybody's design problems rather than just my design problems. I recently started working with the A11Y project, which is really exciting. It's one of the, longest running accessibility blogs on the internet. And I hesitate to say blog because it's really more of a resource than a blog, because there's so many really knowledgeable people that have contributed to it. And it's just an incredible wealth of knowledge. So I've been taking some time to write some things that will be published there. And then I'm mostly shopping around right now for jobs. It's hard because a lot of people are like, well, do you want to do product design? Do you want to do more accessibility? Do you want another community management position? And I'm kind of like, it's sort of a three-legged stool for me, because I feel like all of those things make up some sort of special mix of who I am as a designer, because I bring this like design and design thinking and community focus into any kind of position I'd be in. It's not so much like, is this role going to allow me to do what I want to do, but is it more like, is this role going to showcase a side of me that aligns with, like the direction I want to lean in? So I think there's a lot of really cool opportunities on the horizon. And with Twitter building their team out at the accessibility design team, it's going to be increasing the competition for other companies. So I think that there are going to be a lot more accessibility positions opening up. There's going to be a lot more opportunities for people with disabilities in design, because our voices are important in talking about accessibility. And I think that people are starting to realize that more and more, that we have this in-group knowledge that is not easily transferable. It would take somebody years to just like sit down and learn all the things that you or I know about cognitive disabilities, because we don't escape from it. Like, it's not that I want to escape from it, but it's like, you can't put it down and go home and not think about it. For a lot of people, this is just something that they might think about 8 hours a day. For somebody like me or you, like, the challenges that we face in a world that does not accommodate us are 24/7. And so we're always problem solving.
And lastly, Soren, do you have any final advice for our listeners on how they can incorporate accessibility into their workplaces, their designs, and their overall lives?
Yeah. One of the things that I really like to have people do is to have them watch a couple of shows that have audio descriptions, if they want to like find out what it's like to have audio descriptions, or what it would be like to write really good alt text descriptions. Because some people, they have really great intentions, and they're like, I don't really understand what this alt text stuff is about, but I'm going to completely poetically describe this entire picture. And it's nice that they make the effort to do that. It truly is. Like, it's better than no alt text descriptions at all. But a lot of people kind of miss the point when they describe a picture. And I'm just kind of like, I don't need that much information. Like, I just need to know what's important about the picture. Like, if it's a couple holding hands in a field, like, you don't have to describe every blade of grass. Like, tell me the mood. Tell me, like, why are they holding hands? Like, is there tension? How does it relate to the point of the article, maybe? there's a lot of different things where there's political discourse or articles, and they don't really tell you like what the symbolism on the posters are, things like that. There's a real opportunity for them to lend some accessibility to that, because I can't really like look that up or compare it online. So I sometimes like to have people listen to shows that have audio captions and then compare good audio captions with bad audio captions. And so that's something that I feel like has really helped people to gain a little bit more compassion and understanding, to understand that like they take for granted something that like not everybody has. Not everybody can just sit down and watch TV. They have to find something that accommodates them. One thing would be to find some people that talk about disability to follow. There are a lot of great lists on Twitter to use tools that you feel comfortable with. One that I really like to use is getstark.co. It's this accessibility tool that helps you to look at things like contrast and color ratios, and has some really cool tools that are coming out soon and have been released recently that will like kind of automate some of the process that can be automated, just like developers have automated tools. So designers can have those too. But there are a lot of things that you just like can't replace that are more human oriented, like understanding logic or writing labels for things or understanding hierarchy and importance. So I would say, just like start picking a couple of things to learn and educate yourself about. And if people on your team all pick different parts of, like the new WCAG guidelines for accessibility, then you could pretty much have an entire team that covers accessibility. It's just that everybody kind of has their own zone, which I feel like is a good way for design to be, that everyone knows like a lot of basic stuff about design, but then some people have their own special area that they're responsible for.
Soren, thank you so much for joining me. It was a real pleasure to talk to you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the DroidDevCast. We'll be back next week with another exciting show for you. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode on social media. You can also follow us on Twitter at EsperDev and subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up with all the latest happenings here at Esper. You can listen to the DroidDevCast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Simplecast, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you again for listening.